Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're going way back to ancient Egypt, but not just like, pyramids and pharaohs. We're going to be looking at how ancient Egypt has influenced different cultures and beliefs throughout history.
It's amazing to think about, how these ancient ideas and practices have rippled across time and continents and how they still resonate with us today.
Yeah, and to uncover these connections, we've gathered a really eclectic mix of sources.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
We have sermons, YouTube videos on all sorts of historical and religious topics, even Wikipedia entries and biblical commentaries.
That's quite the mix. It's like we're piecing together a puzzle using pieces from all over the place. So where do we even begin with all of this?
Well, one of our sources, a sermon by Pastor Omar Thibault, dives into the story of Abraham's journey to Egypt during a famine. It's a story that's also found in the book of Genesis, and it really highlights the challenges of faith.
Oh, yeah, I remember that story. So, Abraham basically went to Egypt to escape starvation, but then he got scared that the Pharaoh would, take his wife, Sarah, because she was so beautiful.
Yeah, and instead of trusting God to protect them, Abraham decided to tell the Egyptians that Sarah was his sister, not his wife.
So he, lied to save his own skin? That's kind of messed up.
It is. And the sermon really delves into the moral implications of Abraham's choice. It raises questions about trusting God versus relying on human solutions, and how sometimes our fears can lead us to make decisions that we later regret.
It makes you think, right? What would you do in that kind of situation? It's easy to judge Abraham, but when you're facing a powerful ruler and your life is potentially on the line, you might be tempted to do the same thing.
Exactly. It really gets you thinking about the complexities of faith and how our human instincts can sometimes clash with our beliefs.
It's like this internal battle between what we believe and what we feel compelled to do in the moment.
Now, this whole discussion about Abraham and his journey to Egypt actually ties into a much bigger debate that some of our YouTube sources tackle head on. The question of whether figures like Abraham, Moses, and even Jesus actually existed historically.
Wait, really? People are questioning whether those figures actually existed. That's a pretty bold claim.
It is, and it's a claim that's been circulating for a while. Some argue that these figures are more like mythical archetypes than historical individuals.
So how do these YouTube videos approach such a sensitive topic?
Well, they present arguments from both sides of the debate, trying to remain objective.
Like a balanced perspective.
Right. They explore the historical evidence, or lack thereof, and the different interpretations that have emerged over time. For example, when it comes to Jesus, they point to arguments against his historical existence. But then they also present counterarguments that rely on sources like Josephus, a first-century historian who mentioned Jesus in his writings.
So they're using what's called external evidence to try to corroborate the biblical accounts.
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting. Because even with external evidence, there's still room for interpretation. Some scholars argue that the existing evidence about Jesus is sufficient to prove his historical existence, while others maintain that the evidence is too fragmented or unreliable to draw definitive conclusions.
It's like a historical puzzle with some pieces missing.
And as we delve into these sources, it becomes clear that this deep dive isn't about giving you a definitive answer. It's about presenting you with a range of perspectives and encouraging you to critically analyze the information and form your own conclusions.
I like that approach. It's about empowering the listener to think for themselves.
Now, one of the most fascinating claims that Berean TV explores is the possibility that ancient Egyptian religion actually influenced the development of Greek and Roman gods, which in turn may have influenced Christianity.
Well, hold on. Are they saying that the gods of ancient Greece and Rome were somehow inspired by Egyptian beliefs?
That's what they're suggesting. And it's a theory that has been debated by scholars for decades. On one side, you have researchers who point to similarities in myths, religious practices, and even artistic motifs as evidence of Egyptian influence.
So, are they seeing parallels between Egyptian gods and the Greek and Roman pantheons?
Yes, and they argue that these parallels are too strong to be mere coincidences. They suggest that cultural exchange and the movement of ideas across the ancient world played a significant role in shaping religious beliefs.
But on the other hand,
You have critics who argue that these similarities can be explained by more general cultural diffusion, that it was common for cultures to borrow and adapt ideas from each other without direct influence.
so maybe they were both drawing from a common pool of ancient myths and symbols.
Exactly. And they also point out that the theory of Egyptian influence sometimes gets caught up in what they see as an Afrocentric agenda.
An Afrocentric agenda, what does that even mean?
Well, it's a complex term that could be interpreted in different ways.
Right.
But in this context, they're suggesting that some proponents of the Egyptian influence theory might be overemphasizing the contributions of African civilizations to Western culture.
Oh, I see. So it's like they're questioning the motivations behind some of these claims.
Right. And it's important to acknowledge that this debate isn't just about historical facts. It's also about how we interpret those facts and the lenses we use to understand the past.
It's like history is always being rewritten, and the narratives we choose to focus on often reflect our own values and biases.
Exactly. And this brings us to another layer of complexity, the whole discussion of race and ethnicity within these historical contexts.
Like, who were the ancient Egyptians, and how do their racial identities factor into these debates?
Right. And it's a question that Berean TV tackles head-on, particularly through the lens of ancient Egyptian burial practices and mummification. Those elaborate rituals designed to preserve the body for the afterlife.
Oh, yeah, the mummies. Those are always fascinating.
Yeah.
And a little creepy, to be honest.
I know, right? But they provide valuable insights into ancient Egyptian beliefs about death and the afterlife. And they've also become central to the debate about the ethnicity of ancient Egyptians.
So, like, are people trying to determine the race of ancient Egyptians based on their mummies?
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
And it's become a very sensitive topic because some argue that the physical characteristics of the mummies point to a black African origin, while others maintain that the evidence is inconclusive or that ancient Egyptians represented a more diverse mix of racial and ethnic groups.
Seems like trying to categorize an entire civilization based on modern racial constructs can be really problematic.
Absolutely. Especially when you're dealing with a civilization that spanned thousands of years and interacted with various cultures across vast distances.
It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. Those categories just don't always apply.
And it's important to remember that ancient concepts of race and ethnicity were very different from our own. So trying to impose our modern understanding on the past can lead to all sorts of misunderstandings.
It's like we need to step back and try to see the world through their eyes, to understand their own categories and classifications, not just impose our own.
Right. And one thing that's clear from the sources is that ancient Egypt was a multi-ethnic society with a diverse population that evolved over time.
So it wasn't just one monolithic group, it was a melting pot of cultures and influences.
Exactly. And while it's crucial to acknowledge Egypt's African roots and the significant contributions of African populations to its development, it's also important to recognize the complexities of its history and avoid simplistic categorizations.
It's about appreciating the nuances and acknowledging the contributions of multiple groups, not just trying to fit everything into neat little boxes.
Okay, let's shift gears for a moment and talk about another source that adds a whole new layer of intrigue to our deep dive. We have a YouTube video from Mashiach Assembly, House of YH Ministries, that discusses the Book of Enoch.
The Book of Enoch. Now, that's not part of the traditional Bible, is it?
You're right. It's considered an apocryphal text, which basically means it's a religious writing that didn't make it into the official canon of the Bible, kind of like a hidden chapter of religious history.
Ooh, a hidden chapter. That sounds interesting. So what's so special about this Book of Enoch?
Well, this particular video delves into some pretty mystical interpretations of the text. It talks about the concept of fallen angels, drawing connections to ancient Sumerian mythology, and even suggesting that the biblical figure of Enoch might have been a sort of ancient astronaut who traveled to the heavens.
Whoa, an ancient astronaut. That's a pretty wild theory.
I know, right? But it speaks to the enduring fascination with these ancient texts and how they can be interpreted in so many different ways.
So what else is in this video?
Well, one thing that caught my eye was a comment from a viewer who pointed out the significance of the number 33.
The number 33. What's so special about that?
Well, according to this commenter, the number 33 is connected to both the Pleiades star cluster, which you might know as the Seven Sisters, and also to Freemasonry, which holds the number 33 sacred. It's a fascinating example of how seemingly unrelated ideas can sometimes intersect in unexpected ways.
It's like a web of interconnectedness, with symbols and numerology acting as threads that weave together different cultures and belief systems.
Exactly. And the video also mentions the story of Solomon and the seven spirits, which is another example of how ancient myths and spiritual practices have resonated across time and cultures.
It seems like we're just scratching the surface here. There's so much more to uncover as we delve deeper into these sources.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're going to do in the next part of our deep dive, so stay tuned.
I'm ready to keep digging. It's fascinating how often we see this idea that Ancient practices and beliefs, especially from Egypt, might have influenced later religions and cultures. It's like ripples spreading across time.
It's true. You can trace these threads of influence all over, from Egypt to the Mediterranean and beyond. One example that Berean TV highlights is the idea that the Christian practice of baptism might have roots in ancient Egyptian rituals.
That's a claim that's been around for a while. There are definitely some parallels between various ancient rituals involving water, like ritual cleansing or symbolic rebirth, but we have to be careful not to oversimplify or assume a direct connection just because two cultures used water in their rituals.
Right, it doesn't automatically mean one influenced the other. One of the comments on Berean TV's video actually brought up a good point. They mentioned that ritualistic bathing or immersion in water is found in many cultures around the world, not just in Egypt.
Yeah, that's important to consider. They specifically mentioned the mikveh in Jewish tradition, a ritual bath used for purification. And the discoveries at Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, suggest that they also practiced ritual bathing. So it's a much broader concept than just an Egyptian thing.
So it's like we need to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Avoid jumping to conclusions based on just surface similarities.
Exactly. It all comes back to that idea of critical thinking, which is so important in this whole deep dive. We have to carefully examine the evidence, consider different viewpoints, and be wary of oversimplification.
Okay, speaking of examining evidence, let's shift gears for a bit and see what we can learn from Wikipedia's entry on ancient Egypt. It gives us a glimpse into their daily lives, the challenges they face, their medical practices, all kinds of stuff. For example, did you know they struggled with diseases like malaria and schistosomiasis, which is a nasty parasitic infection you can get from contaminated water?
That's a good point. It's so easy to romanticize the past. We forget that they dealt with some pretty serious health issues back then. It makes sense, though, given their environment and lifestyle. The Nile River was their lifeline, but it also could be a source of disease.
It's incredible how resilient humans are. We've been facing these kinds of challenges for centuries, and it's amazing to see how different cultures have developed unique ways to cope and to heal.
Absolutely. Thinking about ancient Egyptian medical practices is fascinating. They used a mix of practical remedies and spiritual beliefs. They used herbal remedies, performed surgeries, and also relied on things like magic spells and amulets to ward off disease.
It's like a blend of science and superstition.
Right. And it shows how much our understanding of medicine has evolved over time. Their knowledge of the human body and disease was vastly different from ours, but it still offers valuable insights into how people in the past tried to make sense of their world and their bodies.
So picture this daily life in ancient Egypt. What do you think it was like for the average person? Were they all living it up like pharaohs?
Not quite. The Wikipedia entry paints a very different picture. Most people were farmers living in simple mud brick homes that were designed to keep cool in the intense Egyptian heat.
That's a good point.
Mm.
It's easy to forget how much climate and geography shape our lives. Can you imagine trying to survive in that kind of heat without air conditioning?
Yeah, their homes might have been simple, but they were practical, and they still found ways to add beauty to their lives. They decorated their walls with dyed linen hangings, used ceramics for storage and cooking. It's a reminder that people have always found ways to make their homes comfortable and reflect their own unique style, no matter their circumstances.
It's those little details that make history come alive. It's not just about dates and battles. It's about understanding how people lived, what they valued, what they believed in.
Absolutely. And when it comes to ancient Egypt, their beliefs were huge. They had this incredibly complex religious system that influenced every aspect of their society. I mean, their pharaohs ruled by divine right, claiming to be descended from the gods, and they believed in a whole pantheon of deities who controlled everything from the weather to the Nile River to life and death itself.
Wait, so they had a god for everything?
Pretty much. It's hard to wrap your head around all the different gods and goddesses they worship. They had gods for the sun, the moon, the sky, the earth, even for things like childbirth and mummification. Their myths and stories about these gods tell us a lot about their worldview and how they saw their place in the universe.
Did they treat all these gods equally? Or were some more important than others?
Well, their pantheon changed over time. The importance of different gods rose and fell depending on the period and the ruling dynasty. But one thing that remained constant was their concept of Ma'at, represented truth, justice, balance, and cosmic order. It was like the foundation of their entire society.
So it was more than just a religious idea. It was like a moral code, a way of life.
Exactly. They believed that maintaining Ma'at was essential for keeping the universe in harmony and ensuring the prosperity of their kingdom. They saw their pharaoh as the embodiment of Ma'at, responsible for upholding justice and order. And they believed that by living in accordance with Ma'at, they could please the gods and secure a good afterlife.
Speaking of the afterlife, the ancient Egyptians were obsessed with it, right? I mean, they're famous for their elaborate burial practices, especially mummification.
Yeah, mummification was a big deal. It wasn't just about preserving the body, it was about ensuring the survival of the soul in the afterlife. They believed that the soul needed a physical body to inhabit, so they went to great lengths to preserve it.
It's incredible to think about the level of skill and knowledge they had. The whole process is fascinating.
Yeah.
Removing the organs, drying and embalming the body, wrapping it in layers of linen, placing it in a sarcophagus, and surrounding it with all sorts of treasures and offerings.
It was like a whole industry devoted to death. And their tombs weren't just burial chambers. They were like elaborate underground palaces filled with everything the deceased would need for their journey through the underworld.
It's a reminder that death has always been a source of both fear and fascination for humans. And different cultures have developed unique ways to cope with the mystery of what happens after we die.
Absolutely. It's a universal human experience. And exploring how different cultures have approached death and the afterlife can give us some really interesting insights into their beliefs and values.
This whole discussion about ancient Egyptian religion and the afterlife makes me think about the other sources we have, especially the ones that deal with biblical stories and prophecies. It's fascinating to see how different cultures have wrestled with these big questions about life, death, and the nature of the universe.
Exactly. These are themes that have captivated human imagination for millennia. And exploring these different perspectives can really challenge our assumptions and broaden our understanding of the human experience.
So let's dive back into those biblical sources. We have a YouTube video from Calvary Chapel, Ontario that takes a closer look at Abram's journey to Egypt, the same story we talked about earlier. But this time they're examining it through a theological lens, raising questions about trust in God's provision versus relying on human solutions.
That's interesting. So they're digging deeper into the meaning behind the story, not just recounting the events.
Right. And one thing they emphasize is that there's no indication in the Bible that God actually told Abram to go to Egypt. It was Abram's own choice, driven by fear and his desire to protect himself and Sarah during the famine.
So are they suggesting that Abram's faith wasn't as strong as we might think, that he had doubts and fears just like anyone else?
Exactly. They're pointing out that even the figures we consider heroes of faith were still human. They made mistakes, they struggled with their beliefs, and their stories remind us that faith is often a journey, not a destination.
That's a really important point. It humanizes these biblical figures, and it makes their struggles more relatable to us today.
Right. And the video also explores the consequences of Abram's decision, like how his attempt to deceive the Pharaoh led to all sorts of unintended problems. It's a reminder that our choices have consequences, even when we're trying to do what we think is best.
It's a classic example of the road to hell being paved with good intentions.
Now, speaking of choices and consequences, we have another source that delves into a topic that's particularly relevant to a lot of people today. The question whether Christians should vote.
Oh, wow, that's a hot button issue. I can see why that would spark some debate.
Definitely. It's something that Christians have been grappling with for centuries. And this particular source, a YouTube video from online ministry, Church Watchman Reports, takes a pretty strong stance against voting.
Really? So they're saying Christians shouldn't participate in the political process at all?
That's their argument. They believe that Christians should be separate from the world, that their true citizenship is in heaven, not on earth, and that participating in earthly politics is a form of compromise.
It's an interesting perspective. I can see how some people might find that appealing, especially if they feel disillusioned with the state of politics today.
It's a separatist viewpoint, and it reflects a certain interpretation of biblical teachings about the relationship between Christians and the world.
It's definitely food for thought. Whether you agree with them or not, it raises some important questions about the role of faith in public life.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that there are many different ways to interpret and live out one's faith, and that these interpretations can have a real impact on how we engage with the world around us.
Okay, so we've talked about sermons, YouTube videos, Wikipedia entries. What other sources do we have in the mix?
Well, we also have a YouTube video from Holy Bible that features an audio reading of the entire book of Genesis.
Oh, wow, that's a commitment. Listening to the whole book read aloud.
I know, right? But there's something really powerful about hearing the Bible read aloud. It's a different experience than just reading it silently. You can really appreciate the beauty of the language and the rhythm of the stories.
It's like you're being transported back in time, hearing those ancient words spoken aloud.
Exactly. And the book of Genesis, in particular, is so foundational to understanding the whole biblical narrative. It lays out the creation story, the fall of humanity, the stories of the patriarchs, the covenant with Abraham. It's like the starting point for everything that follows.
I can see why they would include that in the deep dive. It sets the stage for so much of what we're discussing.
Now let's circle back to a topic that we touched on earlier, the ethnicity of ancient Egyptians. We have another YouTube video from Berean TV that goes even deeper into this question, and it doesn't shy away from the controversy.
Oh yeah, this is a topic that people have some strong opinions about. So how does this video approach it?
It starts by acknowledging the complexity of the issue, emphasizing that ancient Egypt was a multi-ethnic society with a long and diverse history.
So right off the bat, they're rejecting the idea that there is one Egyptian race.
Exactly. They're pushing back against those simplistic categorizations that we often see in these debates.
But then, how do they address the question of race and ethnicity in ancient Egypt?
Well, they acknowledge that Egypt was an African civilization. But they also point out that it was a melting pot of cultures due to its location at the crossroads of trade and cultural exchange.
So they're saying it wasn't just about black and white, it was much more nuanced than that.
Right. They're emphasizing the contributions of African populations while also recognizing the influence of other groups from the Middle East, Asia, and even Europe.
It's like they're trying to paint a more complete picture, one that acknowledges the diversity of ancient Egyptian society.
And they also make an important point about the limitations of using mummies to determine ethnicity.
Because mummification might have altered the physical characteristics of the bodies.
Exactly. And they argue that we need to consider a wider range of evidence, like artistic representations, genetic studies, historical records, to get a more accurate understanding.
It's a reminder that history is messy, and we can't always rely on simple answers or easy categories.
Okay, let's switch gears again and talk about another source that offers a more mystical interpretation of ancient texts. We have another YouTube video from Mashiach Assembly, House of YAH Ministries. And this time, they're exploring the Book of Enoch again.
So we're back to the hidden chapter of the Bible. What are they focusing on this time?
This video is all about the mystical and esoteric aspects of the Book of Enoch. They're drawing connections to ancient Sumerian mythology, exploring themes of cosmic conflict, fallen angels, and the nature of good and evil.
It sounds like we're going deep into the realm of symbolism and hidden knowledge.
We are. And one of the things they discuss is the Pleiades, which is a star cluster that appears in various ancient mythologies. You might know it as the Seven Sisters. It's a beautiful cluster of stars that has captivated people's imaginations for centuries.
Oh yeah, I've heard of the Pleiades, so what do they say about it?
Well, they suggest that the Pleiades might be connected to the fallen angels mentioned in the Book of Enoch.
Whoa, hold on, fallen angels in a star cluster. How do they make
What?
that connection?
It's based on ancient traditions that saw the Pleiades as a realm of celestial beings or spirits. And linking them to the fallen angels adds this layer of mystery and intrigue.
It's like they're seeing a cosmic battle playing out in the night sky.
Exactly. And they even suggest that the Pleiades might be the origin of the Freemasons' number 33, which is considered sacred in their tradition.
It's fascinating how these seemingly unrelated things can sometimes converge. It's like there's this hidden web of connections linking ancient myths, religious beliefs, and even secret societies.
And the video also revisits the story of Solomon and the seven spirits. But this time they're presenting it in a much more mystical light.
Oh, how so?
Instead of seeing the seven spirits as representations of wisdom or temptation, they're portraying them as actual demonic forces that Solomon was trying to control and use for his own purposes.
It's a much darker interpretation, almost like a cautionary tale about the dangers of dabbling in the occult.
Exactly. It's a reminder that the pursuit of power and knowledge can be a slippery slope, and that sometimes the things we try to control end up controlling us.
It's a theme that we see throughout history and in many different cultures. The idea that there are forces beyond our understanding that we should be careful not to tamper with.
Okay, let's shift gears one last time and go back to the concept of exile and return. This theme has been so central to our exploration of ancient Jewish history. And we have one more YouTube video from the History Hub that provides a really great overview of this recurring motif.
It's amazing how resilient the Jewish people have been throughout history, facing persecution and displacement time and again, yet managing to preserve their identity and traditions.
Absolutely. Their story is a testament to the power of faith and community to overcome adversity. And this video really captures that.
It traces their history from the time of the patriarchs all the way to the establishment of the modern state of Israel, highlighting the key periods of exile and return that have shaped their collective memory and worldview.
What were some of the most pivotal events that shaped this narrative of exile and return?
Well, the video focuses on several key events. The Babylonian exile in the 6th century BC, the Roman destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, and the subsequent diaspora that scattered Jewish communities all over the world. These were all incredibly traumatic events that forced them to adapt and find new ways to practice their faith and maintain their cultural identity.
It's hard to imagine what it must have been like to experience that kind of upheaval and loss, to be torn away from your homeland and scattered to the winds.
It's a testament to their strength and determination that they were able to preserve their traditions and pass them down through generations, even in the face of such adversity.
It makes you wonder what allowed them to maintain that sense of hope and resilience, even after centuries of exile.
I think it speaks to the power of faith and the importance of community. Their belief in a covenant with God, the promise of a return to their homeland, and the support they found in their shared traditions. These things gave them a sense of purpose and identity that transcended their physical circumstances.
This whole discussion about exile and return makes me think about the other sources we've explored that deal with the question of citizenship and political engagement, like the YouTube video that argued against Christians voting.
You mean the one from Online Ministry, Church Watchmen Reports?
Yeah. It's interesting to contrast their perspective with the experiences of the Jewish people, who have faced centuries of exile and displacement, yet still maintain this strong connection to their homeland and their desire for political self-determination.
It highlights the different ways that people interpret the relationship between faith and politics, and how those interpretations can be shaped by historical experiences and cultural contexts.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all answer to these questions, and that we need to be respectful of the diverse perspectives that people bring to these discussions.
So where do we go from here? We've covered so much ground in this deep dive. It's like we've opened up a Pandora's box of ancient mysteries and modern-day dilemmas.
I know it's a lot to process, but that's the beauty of these deep dives. They're designed to challenge our assumptions, expand our perspectives, and spark new conversations.
I think one of the most important takeaways is that the past is never truly past. It continues to shape our present in ways that we might not even realize. And by exploring these connections, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Well said. So stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll try to tie all these threads together and see what insights we can glean from this fascinating journey through time and belief.
It's incredible how much ground we've covered, from those ancient Egyptian myths and biblical stories to wow, present-day debates about politics and religions. We've been on a whirlwind tour through time.
Yeah, and it all started with this seemingly simple question about ancient Egypt's influence. And it's taken us to some pretty unexpected places.
It's like we've been following these threads, and they've led us to this incredibly intricate tapestry of history and culture. It's a reminder that everything is connected.
Absolutely. And one thing that's become really clear is that these ancient stories and beliefs still have the power to shape our understanding of the world today, even thousands of years later.
They do. And they often spark these really intense debates, because they touch on such fundamental questions about who we are, where we come from, what we believe in.
Okay, so let's jump back into the source material and see what else we can uncover. We have another YouTube video from Online Ministry, Church Watchmen Reports. And this one tackles a topic that's been a source of controversy for centuries: the relationship between Christianity and politics.
Oh, that's a big one. There are so many different viewpoints on that. So what's their take?
Well, this particular video argues that Christians should not engage in political processes at all. They believe that voting and participating in political systems is actually incompatible with true Christian faith.
Wow, that's a pretty radical stance. I'm guessing that doesn't sit well with everyone.
It definitely challenges the conventional view, which often sees civic engagement as a duty for Christians. But their argument is based on the idea that Christians should be separate from the world, that their allegiance is to a higher authority, not to earthly governments.
So it's like a separatist viewpoint. They're saying that Christians should focus on spiritual matters and not get caught up in the messy world of politics.
Exactly. They see the world as a battleground between good and evil, and they believe that Christians shouldn't compromise their faith by participating in systems that they see as inherently corrupt.
It's definitely a thought-provoking perspective. Whether you agree with it or not, it forces you to examine your own beliefs about the role of faith in public life.
It does. And it highlights the diversity of interpretations within Christianity.
Yeah.
There's no one-size-fits-all answer to these questions.
So it's up to each individual to decide how they want to navigate the intersection of faith and politics.
Exactly. Okay, let's take a break from these heavy theological debates and shift gears for a moment. We have a Wikipedia entry that explores a different aspect of ancient Egyptian culture, their legal system.
Oh, that's interesting. I always find it fascinating to see how different cultures have approached the concept of justice. So what was their legal system like?
Well, their legal system was deeply intertwined with their religious beliefs, which makes sense given everything we've learned about ancient Egyptian culture. The pharaoh, who was seen as a divine ruler, was actually the head of the legal system. He was responsible for enacting laws, delivering justice, and maintaining order.
So it was like a blend of secular and sacred authority.
Exactly. And their legal philosophy was based on this concept of Mat, which we've talked about before. It represented truth, justice, balance, and cosmic order. It was the foundation of their entire society.
And it wasn't just about legal matters. Mat was a moral principle that guided every aspect of their lives.
Right. They believed that by living in accordance with Mahat, they would please the gods and ensure a harmonious existence, both in this life and in the afterlife.
It's amazing how this ancient concept still resonates with us today. We still talk about the importance of truth, justice, and balance. These are universal values that transcend time and culture.
Absolutely. It shows that despite all the differences between our world and theirs, there are still some fundamental human experiences that connect us across the millennia.
Okay, let's dive back into the more mystical side of things. We have another YouTube video from Mashaf Assembly, House of YAH Ministries. And this time, they're revisiting the story of Solomon and the seven spirits.
Ah, yes, that story. It's a classic. But I'm guessing they're not going for the traditional interpretation.
You know them better than that by now. They're definitely putting their own spin on it. They're presenting a more occult interpretation, suggesting that the seven spirits weren't just symbols of wisdom or temptation. They were actual demonic entities that Solomon was trying to control and use for his own gain.
That's a much darker take on the story than we usually hear.
It is. It's like they're delving into the shadow side of spirituality, exploring the idea that there are these powerful forces out there that can be both alluring and dangerous.
It's a reminder that the pursuit of power and knowledge can be a double-edged sword.
Exactly. And that sometimes the things we try to control can end up controlling us.
Okay, let's come full circle and revisit the theme of exile and return, which has been so central to our exploration of ancient Jewish history. We have one more YouTube video from the History Hub that provides a really comprehensive overview of this recurring motif.
You know, it's incredible how the Jewish people have managed to preserve their identity and their traditions through centuries of upheaval and displacement. Their story is truly inspiring.
It is. And this video does a great job of tracing their journey through time, highlighting the key periods of exile and return that have shaped their collective memory.
They start with the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BC, which was a pivotal moment in their history. The destruction of the first temple and the forced relocation to Babylon was a traumatic experience. But it also led to some important developments in their religious thought and practice.
Like the codification of the Hebrew Bible and the development of the synagogue as a central place of worship.
Exactly. They had to find new ways to practice their faith and maintain their community in the absence of the temple, and these innovations helped them to survive and thrive in exile.
And then, of course, there was the Roman destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, which led to another major diaspora. This time, the Jewish people were scattered even further across the Roman Empire and beyond.
And yet, they still found ways to adapt and maintain their traditions. They developed Rabbinic Judaism, which relied on the interpretation of the Torah and the Talmud rather than on the temple rituals. And they continued to yearn for a return to their homeland, a hope that sustained them through centuries of persecution.
Their story is a powerful reminder that even in the face of immense adversity, cultures and traditions can endure and find ways to flourish.
It's a testament to the human spirit's ability to adapt and overcome challenges.
Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm struck by the sheer diversity of sources we've explored. We've had sermons, YouTube videos, Wikipedia entries, biblical commentaries. It's been an eclectic mix, to say the least.
I know, right? It's like we've been on this intellectual scavenger hunt, gathering pieces of information from all over the place and trying to fit them together.
And what's amazing is that these seemingly disparate sources have actually revealed some really interesting connections, like those threads we were talking about earlier. They've woven together a tapestry of history, religion, and culture that spans continents and millennia.
It's a reminder that everything is connected in some way, and that the past continues to shape our present in ways that we might not always recognize.
So what are some of the key takeaways from this deep dive? What have we learned?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that history is not just a collection of facts and dates. It's a living, breathing thing that's constantly being reinterpreted and reshaped.
Right. It's about understanding the stories we tell ourselves about the past and how those stories influence our understanding of the present.
And another key takeaway is the importance of critical thinking. We've encountered so many different perspectives and interpretations in this deep dive. It's been a masterclass in how to analyze information, evaluate sources, and form our own conclusions.
It's about questioning assumptions, being open to new ideas, and recognizing that there's rarely a single right answer when it comes to these complex questions.
And finally, I think this deep dive has been a reminder that the past is never truly past. These ancient stories and beliefs still resonate with us today. They still have the power to challenge us, inspire us, and provoke us to think more deeply about the world and our place in it.
Well said. So as we conclude this exploration, we encourage you, our listeners, to keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into the rich and fascinating world of history, religion, and culture. There's always more to discover, more connections to make, and more insights to be gained.
It's been a pleasure joining you on this journey. Until next time, keep those minds curious.